downstairs conference room. The chief will be conducting a press conference with regards to the findings of the incident at 6700 block of Zambrano earlier this year. We do want to let you all know that we are streaming this live on Facebook. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to our police chief, Greg Allen.
Good morning, everyone. In response to the incident that occurred July 5th on the 6700 block of Zambrano, an investigation was conducted. The investigation was not anything generated from external sources, namely a complaining witness. This investigation took place because of media attention to the event, and also due to the fact that it was videotaped by the people involved in the incident. The internal investigation consisted of a special disciplinary review board. To my left here is Lieutenant John Lanahan from the Internal Affairs Division, who was in charge of the actual investigation. We used extra resources to expedite this investigation to make sure it was done in a timely fashion. But even with that being done, the consequences of what we see were very timely. The membership of the board consisted of 13 members. One commander was on the board, 2 lieutenants. One of the lieutenants was from our training division, 1 sergeant, 1 detective, and a uniformed, non-uniformed member of our human resources division, a civilian. Citizens of the community were also involved. The discipline review board was chaired by an assistant chief on my staff. There were 4 additional civilian advisory board members that are in preparation for full membership, also in attendance at that meeting. The witnesses to this event were independent witnesses, 19. 9 were direct witnesses from the neighborhood, and there were officers also involved in the incident that were part of the investigation as well. The board heard from all parties involved, namely the witnesses from the neighborhood and the officers that responded to the scene. The board's findings were unanimous. The entire membership of the board, counting all the people involving sworn and civilians, were 13 members of the board. The board had unanimous decision on this. The actions of the officer, as far as pointing a gun at an individual or a group of individuals, was unfounded. He did point a weapon at a specific individual that he felt at that point in time presented a deadly threat to him. At that time, that is when he drew the weapon and reholstered as soon as he realized the threat wasn't imminent. The other finding was unfounded as far as the choking of the individual. Witness statements from the scene, from the individuals who weren't involved in the incident but participating as far as standing back watching the event transpire, did not find any officer at the scene choking any of the individual children at the time. The officer had prior knowledge of this neighborhood. Previously, there had been shots fired calls there. He had been sent there on that particular day for a criminal mischief call in progress. So the officer was on high alert, needless to say, as far as his safety and handling the call that he was dispatched to handle. With all that being taken into consideration, there is a standard of U.S. law from a Supreme Court judgment, Graham versus Connor, back in 1989, if my time is right on the finding of that, which allows officers to make judgments of the incidents at the scene at the time they are handling the event. That particular consideration was also a concern when we were hearing this case. And that is a big concern for the officer actually at the scene. The perceptions of what might be seen on video are of consequence, but they aren't the full consideration in the event that we're looking at here today. As I said before, the board found this particular incident exonerated overall, and I concur with those findings. And with that, I'll take some questions.
As a result of this incident, it was national headlines. Are you gonna offer, is the police department gonna offer any training for officers involving social media recording? We did see in the video that he was trying to take the phone away from the woman who was recording.
I don't believe that was his actions entirely. I don't agree with that particular statement. And officers do receive training on videotaping all the time. That is a First Amendment protection afforded by every individual. So officers know that is something that they cannot do because they're being videotaped. That's part of their job right now.
Can you clarify what's going to be happening with the officer that was involved?
The officer is back to work.
And as far as the children, haven't been any charges on any of the other people involved?
Any charges?
Mm-hmm.
There have been charges filed by the Sheriff's Department in arresting some of the kids from that video because they are identified as being participants in some type of event where criminal actions were taking place over at a Scaredy Park. So that is pending with the courts if anything should happen any further.
But there are no charges in this specific case.
We did file charges against the adult juvenile who was 17 that was interfering. I don't know where that particularly stands right now. I understand the DA's office is taking that under consideration.
The perception for the police department might have changed in our community. Is there any message
I'm
that
sorry,
you have?
ma'am, would you mind repeating that?
Yeah, the perception for the police department as a result of this videotaping and this whole national outcry, is there any message that you have for the community in reference to the department itself?
Well, the video in a lot of people's minds are often revealing and factual as far as that being what actually occurred. But all the substance of the event have to be taken into consideration for a due process right that the officers afforded and to get it right as far as what actually happened at the time of the event. And so with all that in place, even though a small snippet of film may have portrayed the officer in a bad light, the totality of circumstances is what we have to go by to make this a fair process to both the individuals that the officer is dealing with and with the officer himself.
Is the actual internal affairs investigation report going to be released?
No, I'm afraid not at this particular time. I understand that the family has acquired an attorney. We don't know if that is for criminal actions and or possible civil suit. And with the involvement of children being involved or people not of age, we have to keep that under wraps right now for the protection of the juveniles' identities.
Is the officer's name going to be released?
I'm sorry?
Is the officer's name going to be released?
Yes. His name is Joe Rios, out of Central Command.
Now, Officer Joe Rios, is he going to be assigned to that area again, or is he assigned to another area?
Exactly.
He'll be staying put in that area.
Yeah, the fact that he was involved in an incident that drew a lot of attention is no reason, in my opinion, and I know I'm right on that, not to take that person out of the community simply because there was an outrage at one point.
We want to thank you guys very much for your questions. We have a fact sheet that we'd like to give you at this time. And this concludes our press conference. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Yep. I called it. What can I say? It's a sad time for El Paso and the citizens of El Paso. But it's not the only sad time. These kinds of situations have been going on for a very, very long time. As far as me personally, with how old I am, I can account for at least the past 20 years that I myself have observed the corruption of the El Paso Police Department. And I'm not talking about just the West Side, but I am talking about all departments. The Northeast, the East Side, every single one of them. All these motherfucking departments have corrupt ass pigs. And none of them have any so-called good pigs. I've seen them. I've come across them. I know what they're like. I know how they operate. Which is why I knew exactly how this outcome was going to turn out when it came to backing Blue ISIS. And it's fucked up, man, because there's so many El Pasoans out there that are blind to this kind of corruption and tyranny that when this press conference was finished with and everybody got to commenting on social media, once again, just comment after comment after comment, supporting the blue ISIS, supporting the thin blue terrorist line. Like, it just baffles me how people don't understand. They refuse to see it, you know. It kills me. It kills me because when they do that, they enable these fucking corrupt ass pigs to be who they are. Because the collective people don't do anything about these bad pigs, just like the so-called good pigs don't do nothing about the bad pigs. So it's like a virus. It just keeps growing and growing and growing and infecting every police pig that enters the force, and continues to just spread and spread and spread, and it doesn't show any sign of slowing down. And it's not just El Paso, but it's the entire fucking country, man. So yeah, um, this is corruption at its finest right here. You know, and there's a lot more where that came from. I guarantee you that much, because again, I myself have personally experienced it. You know, and if me, just one individual, has experienced it, I know for damn sure that I'm not the only one. All right, there's plenty of more El Pasoans out there who have also experienced what it's like to be confronted by these criminals, this criminal mafia, this legal criminal entity that roams our city streets with guns and badges and weapons to use against us, with the monopoly on force. But it's just sad to say that the majority of El Pasoans just don't give a shit, you know? They take it up the ass and continue on their merry way. You know, as Ben Franklin said, those who are willing to give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. And the majority of El Pasoans purchase that little temporary safety. So I'm going to go ahead and break this video down. I'm going to slice it up and talk about the key components of this video, and let you know what I think about it, and hopefully you can see what I'm trying to point out to you here.
The board had unanimous decision on this. The actions of the officer, as far as pointing a gun at an individual or a group of individuals, was unfounded.
Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about here is the statement that you just heard Mr. Police Chief Pig here say. Now, I'm pretty baffled by this statement because, as you will hear in the next statement, it just does not make any sense. He like completely contradicts himself on this. So he said just now that the actions of the officer, as far as pointing a gun at an individual or a group of individuals, was unfounded. Like, to me, that specific language tends to speak in terms of that there was no findings of the officer pointing a gun at an individual or group of individuals. Okay, that's what that shit sounds like to me. But then right after that, just a split second later, he says he did point a gun at a specific person. Take a listen.
He did point a weapon at a specific individual that he felt at that point in time presented a deadly threat to him.
Okay, so it was unfounded by unanimous decision that the actions of the officer pointing a gun at an individual or group of individuals, but yet he just finished saying that the officer did point a gun at a specific person. What kind of shit is that? I mean, come on. Like, already this motherfucker's like contradicting himself. He's stepping on his own foot. He's not getting the facts straight. He's saying one thing and then he goes right after that to say something else. It's just like complete nonsense. So he then but he is admitting after the fact that the officer did pull a gun and point it at a specific person. Okay? And then he goes on to say that he did it. Okay, now keep in mind that he is speaking for that pig, that criminal cop that pulled his gun out on the kids. He's speaking on his behalf officially. All right? And he's saying this as himself being the police chief pig to be true and factual. And he's speaking on behalf of the board in which their findings were supposedly unfounded of him pointing a gun at individual or a group of individuals. But I'm going to show you something here because he then backs up the actions of the officer with it being imminent deadly threat. Those were his words, not mine, not anybody else's. Mr. Police Chief Pig here says beyond a reasonable doubt that it is factual that the pig pulled his gun out on a group of kids. Well, I'm calling it a group of kids, but he's specifically saying that it's a specific individual, but I'm going to show you what's up right now. But he's saying that the cop pulled out his weapon on a specific individual who posed an imminent deadly threat against him. Take a look at this footage. Okay, so be honest with yourself. Where's the imminent deadly threat? You need to see the footage again? All right, let's hit the replay. Check it out. So I ask again, where's the imminent deadly threat? We're not talking about the use of force. We're talking about the use of deadly force. And Chief Pig here is speaking on behalf officially of the pig who pulled out his weapon, on behalf of the board, and on behalf of himself. He is officially and factually stating, not saying, not as an opinion, but stating that that pig was in imminent fear for his life because he perceived these kids, these unarmed kids, to be a deadly threat. Okay? Now, if you haven't seen my video on the murder of Daniel Shaver, that motherfucker was, no disrespect, but that guy was crawling on his hands and knees crying. And the moment he made a second nature move to pull up his pants up because they were falling down, the cops were in imminent fear of their lives, of an imminent deadly threat, and they murdered him only to find out that he was completely unarmed. No gun was found on his person when they murdered that guy. The same thing with these kids here. This motherfucker pulled out his gun on a bunch of kids that would turn out to be unarmed. And imagine if he pulled the trigger. Holy shit. But okay, that's not the end of it. The fact here is this motherfucking pig, if you noticed him, he turned and looked to those kids for a good maybe 2, 3, maybe 4 seconds before he pulled out his gun and pointed at them. All right? When you're in imminent fear of your life over what the chief pig is officially stating, a deadly threat, a perception of a deadly threat, that means that you have every reason to believe that this motherfucker's running at you with full force, trying to kill you in some sort of fashion. Where do you see these kids posing an imminent deadly threat? Where do you see them pulling out a knife or a gun? What do you see these kids doing except utilizing their freedom of speech towards this pig officer who basically, what's the word I'm looking for? Who agitated these kids by his actions of choking the kid. He riled them up. That was his own fault. And these kids were utilizing their First Amendment to free speech towards this pig, and he turns around, he looks at him for 2, 3, 4 seconds, and he pulls out his gun and then wants to call it later on an imminent deadly threat. I tell you what, folks, if you or I did that in a real life scenario, we're going to prison. All right, we are going to be charged. We are going to be stripped away of our Second Amendment rights. They're going to take our fucking weapons away. They're going to stick us in a cage, and we are going down if we did what this fucking pig did. If I turn to my left and I look at that person and they're just standing there not doing nothing but yelling obscenities to me, and I pull out my gun, it's in the statutes. I cannot use force on a person who's just standing there yelling at me. You know what I'm saying? And that's the beauty of this. The pig is not talking about the kids just standing there yelling at him. He's not saying that as his official statement. He's saying the official reasonable suspicion was an imminent deadly threat to him. And that's why he pulled out his gun, because he perceived these kids to want to kill him, to want to cause serious bodily harm that will cause death. Where do you see these kids do that? All right. And last but not least, when I talked about group of kids versus him saying specific kid, he pointed his gun at a group of kids. When you're on the business end of a rifle, of a pistol, of a revolver, what have you, a gun, when you're on the business end of that and there's a group of individuals in close quarters to each other, you are basically sweeping all of those kids. You are sweeping all those individuals. You are pointing your gun at all those individuals. There's no such thing as having a tight group of individuals that are close to each other and pointing the gun at a specific person. Okay, if you want to get technical, yes, the barrel will be pointed straight at maybe one person. It's not gonna you're not gonna pull the trigger and the bullet's gonna split in a bunch of different bullets and hit all three of them, simultaneously. But the fact of the matter is that bullets can change directions when they impact their targets. That bullet could go straight through the kid and hit the kid behind him. That bullet could hit bones inside the kid or tissue, and the bullet could actually ricochet inside him and exit out of, let's say it goes in his chest, it could exit out his neck and hit the guy to the kid to his right side. All right. As long as you're pointing a gun in a direction that is not considered safe, and there's a bunch of people in that area, you are pointing your gun at that group of people. There's no such thing as just pointing it at one person when you got a whole fucking group of people standing there. So this is why I'm trying to, what I'm trying to clarify as far as how this pig is contradicting himself and distorting the facts, because not only is he saying that the findings were unfounded, and then goes on to say that he did pull his gun on a specific individual, but he's lying to people saying that he didn't pull out his gun at a group of kids. He pulled it on a specific individual, but all those kids were on the business end of his pistol. All right. That is an unsafe, I repeat, that is an unsafe direction to point your weapon at when you are not in fear of your life. This motherfucker was not in fear of his life. You can tell it in his voice. And then what does he say as soon as he pulls out his gun? Okay, I'm going to repeat it to you. Get back, motherfucker. All right? He was angry. He wasn't in fear of his life, especially after assessing the situation for 3. We're talking about a highly trained officer had 2, 3, 4 seconds to assess a situation where he has no targets advancing him. He completely ignores the target that's closest to him, and he's under a deadly threat perception, but fails to acknowledge the closest fucking threat to him and points it at the individuals that are actually talking shit. Why? Because he's angry that they're talking shit to him. This is absolutely an infactual, complete nonsense statement of this pig representing the El Paso Police Department, the words that are coming out of his mouth, that this was a perceivable deadly threat. And again, he's reiterating that stance on the fact that there were shots fired and he was on high alert because of the previous shots fired situation. Now, I don't know anything about that shots fired previous situation. But what I can tell you is, as highly trained officers of the law, motherfuckers are supposed to be on high alert at all times. You know, how is it that you're gonna sit there and be more of a badass because of some shit that happened over here, but you're gonna completely let your guard down because shit ain't happening over here when shit can happen anywhere? All right? Just look at school shootings. I mean, school shootings can happen anywhere, you know? And there's plenty of fucking places out there where some shit happens and the people's response are, oh, well, this is a safe neighborhood or this is a safe area. I never, ever thought that something like this would happen. I've lived here for 50, 80 years and nothing like this has ever happened the entire time that I've been here. You know, there's places where shit like that happens, all right? Crime is everywhere and it can happen anywhere and everywhere. So it is completely stupid to sit there and try to back up his story saying that, oh, because of the previous shots fired, the cops were on high alert. Bullshit. They should be on high alert at all fucking times, because the moment that they put their guard down is the moment that they're going to be irresponsible towards the people that they're supposedly protecting and serving. Because when some shit happens there where it doesn't happen and the cop has no reason to be on high alert, people are gonna get hurt. Let's continue.
At that time, that is when he drew the weapon and reholstered as soon as he realized the threat wasn't imminent.
So what Chief Pig here is stating is that the only way his officer, and let's make that officers, because this involves the entire fucking El Paso PD, but specifically this officer, the only way that he can determine that he's not under deadly threat is by actually becoming the deadly threat and pulling out his gun. That's the only perceivable way that this pig can perceive that he's not under attack, that he's not under deadly threat, by pulling out his penis and pointing it at a bunch of fucking innocent kids who are just utilizing their constitutional right to freedom of speech. Okay? Because what I want you to notice is that, again, this pig was staring at those kids for at least a good 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds, what have you. And that basically is equivalent to the same amount of time that this pig had pulled out his gun from the time that he pulled it out to the time he reholstered it. It was virtually the same amount of time. But there is no comprehensible way that this pig, without pulling out his gun, in which he was doing, staring at the kids for 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds, there was absolutely no way he could have utilized that time to assess that he was not under attack. The only comprehensible way that this pig could determine that was by actually pulling out his gun and becoming the deadly threat and violating the rights of those around him. What kind of shit is that? How is that protecting and serving? You know, how are you such a highly trained officer, but the only way that you can perceive that you're not under imminent deadly threat by a bunch of fucking kids is by pulling out your fucking penis in anger, pointing it at them, and calling them motherfuckers? All right? Remember, these kids are private citizens. The cop is a public servant. The kids have every right to say whatever the fuck they want to that pig. But the pig himself, as determined by the core values and the mission statement that the El Paso Police Department have posted on their police department website, and I specifically believe it might be under the no, excuse me. I was going to say internal affairs, but no, it's on the actual police department website, like the homepage, if I'm not mistaken. But the core values state that the pig is supposed to be professional at all times. It is critical that his behavior on and off duty is to reflect the officer's reputation and all this fucking bullshit and nonsense about, you know, establishing close knit relationships with the communities and blah blah blah. Those fucking core values, just a bunch of fucking rhetoric to help them out and making themselves look good. But that's what I'm basically talking about here. This motherfucker, and as well as other pigs, because this sets the grounds for other pigs to follow in his footsteps, that the only way that they can possibly perceive that that there's no imminent deadly threat towards him is by pulling out their deadly weapons and then making that assessment. But oh no, forget about the fact that he had stared at the kids for the same amount of time that he actually had his weapon out. Forget that fact and just like sweep it under the rug. Like that doesn't count. That doesn't matter. Let's continue.
The other finding was unfounded as far as the choking of the individual. Witness statements from the scene, from the individuals who weren't involved in the incident but participating as far as standing back watching the event transpire, did not find any officer at the scene choking any of the individual children at the time.
And I see the officer choking my son, and I'm like, what are you doing? So I got up in his face. I go, what you doing? You don't supposed to be doing that. They didn't see the beginning. They didn't see when they saw my son getting choked and then they tripped him and threw him on the floor. They didn't see that part. That's why the kids were agitated.
En lo personal apoyo al policía.
I personally am on the side of the law because the video shows they were disrespecting the cop.
The officer had prior knowledge of this neighborhood. Previously, there had been shots fired calls there. He had been sent there on that particular day for a criminal mischief call in progress. So the officer was on high alert, needless to say, as far as his safety and handling the call that he was dispatched to handle. With all that being taken into consideration, there's a standard of U.S. law from a Supreme Court judgment, Graham versus Connor, back in 1989, if my time is right on the finding of that, which allows officers to make judgments of the incidents at the scene at the time they are handling the event. That particular consideration was also a concern when we were hearing this case. And that is a big concern for the officer actually at the scene. The perceptions of what might be seen on video are of consequence, but they aren't the full consideration in the event that we're looking at here today.
Although officials say they don't approve of the kid's behavior, they understand the need for proper protocol. It has yet to be determined if the officer was following it.
As I said before, the board found this particular incident exonerated overall, and I concur with those findings. And with that, I'll take some questions.
As a result of this incident, it was national headlines. Are you gonna offer, is the police department gonna offer any training for officers involving social media recording? We did see in the video that he was trying to take the phone away from the woman who was recording.
I don't believe that was his actions entirely. I don't agree with that particular statement. And officers do receive training on videotaping all the time. That is a First Amendment protection afforded by every individual. So officers know that is something that they cannot do because they're being videotaped. That's part of their job right now.
All right, please.
That is a First Amendment protection afforded by every individual. So officers know that is something that they cannot do because they're being videotaped. That's part of their job right now. That is a First Amendment protection afforded by every individual. So officers know that is something that they cannot do because they're being videotaped. That's part of their job right now.
And can you clarify what's going to be happening with the officer that was involved?
The officer is back to work.
And as far as the children, haven't been any charges on any of the other people involved?
Any charges?
Mm-hmm.
There have been charges filed by the Sheriff's Department in arresting some of the kids from that video because they are identified as being participants in some type of event where criminal actions were taking place over at a Scaredy Park. So that is pending with the courts if anything should happen any further.
But there are no charges in this specific case.
We did file charges against the adult juvenile who was 17 that was interfering. I don't know where that particularly stands right now. I understand the DA's office is taking that under consideration.
The perception for the police department might have changed in our community. Is there any message
I'm
that
sorry,
you have?
ma'am, would you mind repeating that?
Yeah, the perception for the police department as a result of this videotaping and this whole national outcry, is there any message that you have for the community in reference to the department itself?
Well, the video in a lot of people's minds are often revealing and factual as far as that being what actually occurred. But all the substance of the event have to be taken into consideration for a due process right that the officers afforded and to get it right as far as what actually happened at the time of the event. And so with all that in place, even though a small snippet of film may have portrayed the officer in a bad light, the totality of circumstances is what we have to go by to make this a fair process to both the individuals that the officer is dealing with and with the officer himself.
Is the actual internal affairs investigation report going to be released?
No, I'm afraid not at this particular time. I understand that the family has acquired an attorney. We don't know if that is for criminal actions and or possible civil suit. And with the involvement of children being involved or people not of age, we have to keep that under wraps right now for the protection of the juveniles' identities.
Is the officer's name going to be released?
I'm sorry?
Is the officer's name going to be released?
Yes. His name is Joe Rios of Central Command.
Now, Officer Joe Rios, is he going to be assigned to that area again, or is he assigned to another area?
Exactly.
He'll be staying put in that area.
Yeah, the fact that he was involved in an incident that drew a lot of attention is no reason, in my opinion, and I know I'm right on that, not to take that person out of the community simply because there was an outrage at one point.
We want to thank you guys very much for your questions. We have a fact sheet that we'd like to give you at this time. And this concludes our press conference. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Shot and killed yesterday when Bexar County Sheriff's deputies opened fire on a burglary suspect. 6-year-old Cameron Prescott was hit with a stray bullet. The sheriff says the woman that they were chasing broke into Prescott's home and threatened the family in order to steal her car. The 4 deputies confronted her on the porch and began shooting and killed the suspect. One of the rounds pierced through the mobile home, hitting and killing Cameron. Deputies say the suspect had no connection to the little boy's family. KXAN's Lauren Landman is in Schertz this evening. Lauren, has there been a lot of activity out there that you've seen today?
Sydney, I've seen dozens of investigators going in and out of the Pecan Grove neighborhood all morning and afternoon. Law enforcement says although the woman had a gun when they started chasing her, when she was shot and killed, there was no weapon to be found.
The civilian witnesses report that they could hear her physically threaten to shoot the people that were outside. Again, we know them to be the deputies that were making contact with her. We found a tubular object underneath that deck that had the suspect's blood on it, but additionally mud. And we believe now that that object was very well what the deputies saw, also what the civilian witnesses saw, and all of them perceived to be a weapon of some sort.
While I've been out here, a lot of sheriff deputies have been gathering and walking through the trees just outside of the neighborhood, and a DPS helicopter has been flying above, I'm assuming searching for a weapon. This morning, we got our first close look at the scene where crews were cleaning up. Toys are still in the yard, and through the shattered glass door, you can see a Christmas tree lit and people outside scrubbing the front porch. The school district where the little boy attended is also grieving the loss. This afternoon, they released a statement describing Cameron as a kind-hearted little boy who was a ball of energy. His first grade teacher says he had a great sense of humor and a caring heart. He'll be truly missed by his classmates, teachers, and staff. A fund has been created to help pay for Cameron's funeral. You can drop off all your donations at the Shirts Bank and Trust branches, or you can donate by sending it through the mail. You can find out all of that information on our website, kxan.com.